Hey everyone, welcome to a Screenwriter's Take. My name is Tony D. And today we're going to talk a little bit about Game of Thrones. I'm trying to make these videos a little shorter because I kind of tend to ramble on. So I'm going to try to make this one short and concise. So here's my basic take on Game of Thrones as it stands now. Looking at the current episode, the season opener, I thought it was really solid. But, and here's my caveat, there's really two versions of Game of Thrones. There's the first three and a half seasons, maybe the end of season 4, and then there's everything after that. And everything before they ran out of the books, basically, was, in my view, pushing the limits of television. I mean, there was nothing like it. It was so compelling to watch those first 3 seasons and just not know who was going to live, who was going to die, where the show was going. It was going in so many different directions. There were so many factions and characters, and it was nuts. And I had never felt so much, worry for characters watching this show, because you literally did not know who would live or die. And one of the great things about the show is a character wouldn't just die. Like a lot of times on television, characters die, but you could see it coming a mile away because the character is either bad, right? So they're setting him up to die because he deserves it. Or it's just that there's nothing much to him, so they don't want you to get too attached because they're going to kill him anyway. And there's nothing in the future for this character. Like, he's not making any plans. There's only one place he's going, and that's right into a hole. The great thing about Game of Thrones is you did not feel that way at all. So, for instance, when, spoilers, Oberyn was killed, it was a big surprise. Because Oberyn seemed like a character that was going to take over, at least for a while, on the series. Same thing with Joffrey, who hands down is my favorite character. Joffrey, the actor who played him, everything about him was just amazing from beginning to end. And it was also great to see him die, because unlike a regular TV show, which probably would have kept a character like that in the mix long after his expiration date, Joffrey died appropriately because he was just such a disagreeable, horrible human being that it was inevitable somebody would kill him. I mean, it was just inevitable because he was just so awful. You know, he just rubbed everybody the wrong way and was clearly going to be a disaster as king. So him dying, you know, it was at one point inevitable, and at one point, you know, you're glad it happened, because not just because he was a bad character, but because any more of Joffrey, if he had somehow survived the poisoning, it would have been lame. The fact that he dies, the fact that he has a beginning and end, makes that character more special. The scenes we saw of him, the episodes we saw of him, makes it more special because there is an expiration date. And that's so with a lot of the characters who died. Then we get into the sort of post, I don't know what you'd call it. I've been talking about this show with Christian Baranek a bit, and she agrees that it's like, you know, right around that time, end of season 4, season 5 is when the show starts to become just regular TV. Part of it is they ran out of books. And when they ran out of books, unfortunately, and it's not that the TV version of Game of Thrones is bad. It's good. It's good TV. But TV's here, and what Game of Thrones was is way up here. You know, good TV is very watchable. There's nothing wrong with it. But what happened to it? First, it became more PC. I mean, that was obvious from the get-go. The gratuitous violence and nudity seemed to be scrubbed out. And there was this idea of, it seemed to be like female characters had all the power all of a sudden. I didn't mind that so much as just as the entire tone of the show changed. And what was, to me, seriously missing now was all this layers. All these layerings, all these factions and characters that just seemed to be everywhere. Suddenly, as the show progressed, they kind of disappeared. And it became a little self-important. Now there's another show on HBO that became, in my view, way too self-important, was The Sopranos. I liked The Sopranos, again, in the early seasons, before it started to get so precious about all its cast and characters that it just seemed to be too important. Whereas if you look at the early seasons, they were kind of flying by the seat of their pants. The characters were just doing whatever. They weren't necessarily super powerful. The stakes weren't necessarily always all high, super high, all the way stacked to the ceiling. By the end of the series, it seemed to me like everything was so important that it was too much for me. And I bailed. I didn't even watch the last couple of seasons. I got so bored with the show. You know, one of my favorite episodes, and I talked about this with Christian, is when Tony goes to take Meadow up to visit a college and then runs into a guy in the witness protection program and then you know, decides that he's going to kill him. And it was great because it was a very low-key episode. There wasn't a lot to it. It was just about a small group of characters. You know, we didn't have like Italian singing or, you know, big drama with all kinds of crazy mafia guys killed. This was a guy who could be killed, and, you know, it was just, they were going to get away with it, and it was a small, tiny thing that was not going to connect back to anybody. And that's what was cool about it. Whereas you compare that to later, where it seemed like every character, it seemed like all the cast members on that show were just wanting to do everything. And that's a real problem when a show becomes that successful. It's almost like success ruins the show. It ruins everybody because, you know, and I can't blame the actors for wanting to do more, wanted to, you know, when they're being seen and in a great show, they're fighting for screen time. But I think in that case, it damaged the show. In Game of Thrones, it didn't really damage the show so much as everybody's kind of like regular TV now. Now, what I liked about the season opener is we had a little bit of a callback to the original by having that scene with Braun, spoiler ahead, and he's with a bunch of whores and they're all naked, and it's just a gratuitous nudity shot, which has been missing from the show. Because everybody in the cast now is so precious, they don't want to get naked anymore. And meanwhile, like, you know, if you watch the early seasons, you don't know who's going to live, you don't know who's going to die, people are naked, sometimes they're not. You know, you feel like, it feels so freewheeling, right? You have that sense of like anything could happen, whereas now everything's sort of tunneling into the end. Now, on the one hand, this season, because it's ending, all the payoffs are happening, and that's sort of offsetting a lot of what, you know, what kind of ruined the show for me a little bit for the last couple of seasons. So, you know, they're killing people off, or they're going to, obviously, they're setting everybody up, everybody's getting, you know, back together, and they had that great gratuitous scene with the kid on the wall and the arms and, you know, the body parts. That was pretty awesome and scary. But again, like, they haven't been doing that for a few seasons. So like one of the things that happened is when Sansa Stark and Theon Greyjoy jumped off that wall to escape the castle from what's his face? I always forget the guy's name. The super evil guy who cut his wiener off. They never really explained how they could jump off that high castle wall and survive the fall. I mean, I assume they would have landed in a giant snowbank because it's winter up in that northern area and maybe there's a big giant pile of snow. But they didn't really show it, and it really bugged me that they didn't. And they didn't explain it either. So, and there were a couple of, don't get me wrong, there were some good, decent episodes. But it didn't have the feel of the first 3 seasons where, like, holy crap, who's going to die next? And because they won't get rid of certain cast members now, you know, the deviations from the books became greater. So, for instance, Peter Dinklage's character, you know, after he kills his father, his character basically goes to live in some kingdom, and he's done in the books, which makes sense. You know, it makes sense. And quite frankly, you know, I really like him as an actor, and I like the character and everything. I'm not annoyed that he's still in it, but if they took him out of it, you know, it wouldn't be a big deal at this point, because the fact that he just keeps surviving and keeps getting into this group or that group, I mean, it shows you where the show is becoming TV, because they need to keep Dinklage in the show. The one character that feels natural to be in the show all this time is Jon Snow, of course, because Jon Snow is kind of the chosen one. He you know, and really his performance is sort of holding everything together. It's kind of the glue that holds the whole show together at this point. So his character sort of is the driving force for the ending. So, I mean, I think it's good, but it's not like we can't see the ending kind of coming, you know? It feels like it's going to be a very not risky ending, a very happy ending where, you know, Jon Snow becomes king and, hey, all the good guys win, and yeah, a few of them die, but otherwise it's okay. Maybe there's a little drama, but ultimately Cersei's sort of been pushed to even more evil, whereas before it wasn't so much that Cersei was evil, although she is. It was also, too, that everybody was messed up. You know, everybody was really just messed in the head in this world. Again, looking at those earlier seasons, like, you know, one of the great things about Sansa's character in those seasons was how naive she was, how in over her head she was at King's Landing. She's just completely out of her depth and totally used and manipulated. And that's one of the great things about that season and her character. Now it's like, you know, Arya calls her the smartest person I know. That's a bit of a stretch. Now, I could see that Sansa started, maybe at some point starts learning stuff from Littlefinger during the season where she's basically his prisoner. I don't think they really made that come across as strong as they could have. But the thing is, now she's really, like, smart. Like, so smart that it stretches the credulity of her character. You know, that she's now suddenly making all the right moves. Because she's got, you know, spies everywhere or something. Like, it didn't really show that learning curve with her that we needed to see, where maybe she starts realizing, hey, I better, you know, kick up my game here if I'm going to survive. She kind of just does. You know, Ramsay, that's a guy whose names I've always, Ramsay Bolton. Even with Ramsay, like, she didn't seem to be doing smart things. She just seemed to be screaming a lot. And kind of maybe towards the end, but... So, I can't say that I'm disappointed in the show. I really loved the season opener this year because it seems to finally be getting the payoffs. I guess my biggest problem with the seasons in between the beginning ones and now was that the payoffs were mostly missing. You know, and the changes in things like the characters and the way they travel. Obviously, in the first couple of seasons, it takes so long for people to get from place to place. And now they're just like, boom, 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 fly on a dragon, move here, move there. You know, there are ways to do that and present that where you could still have this sense of the distance. And now they've kind of like eliminated that, which I think was a huge mistake. Not only because it changed the tone of the show, but because it flies in the face of what the show was. It was it felt medieval. It felt real and gritty. And now it just feels like, we're wrapping this up. Everybody get in their car and drive to King's Landing for the final fight, you know? It's like, I can't see that happening. And a part of the thing that's driving it now is like, now Cersei is like, looks like as Christian said, looks like a evil Disney princess now. And it's true. It's like that wasn't in the mix in the beginning. You know, why does Cersei need to look all dark and brooding? Strikes me as not the way she was in the beginning in terms of her character. That she liked looking beautiful and young and, you know, all that good stuff. That she liked looking more innocent, you know? But, I mean, look, I get it. The short hair was all from the shame part. But, you know, so many of the factions have disappeared. And I get that Cersei killed a bunch of them in King's Landing. But it would be nice to see, I don't know, the remnants of something. Or in the old show, I think there would have been a replacement faction. You know, there still would be all these factions running around. And I guess part of the problem is all the good guys are together and there's like 1 million characters now. And now they really need to start dying so we could sort of thin out the herd and get to the final conclusion. So, what's my take on Game of Thrones? Overall, I think it's worth watching. I think they'll never, ever have a big enough payoff as those first 3 seasons. And I always like to throw in my version of my ending of Game of Thrones. My dream ending for Game of Thrones would be this. And you're going to hate me for saying it, but if they wrote it the way to match the old show, the way I would do it is there's a huge battle between Snow, you know, Daenerys against Cersei. And at the end, everybody dies except Cersei. She wins. But everybody's dead. I mean, everybody is dead. And she looks out over a kingdom that's in flames. Everyone's dead. She's won, but she hasn't won. Say that would be my ending for Game of Thrones. But people, I think, would go bananas. You know, I would kill everybody just to see everybody die at the end and, you know, just have this idea of a totally destroyed kingdom, you know, where you could then do stories after that, like, you know, no one can rule Westeros now. All the major figures are dead. It's just Mad Max times in medieval, and then you could you know, you could start the new series with brand new characters who are just like, all the kings are dead, all the nobles are dead. It's just regular people now, like taking over castles and making a name for themselves. That to me would be at least daring and interesting, if not satisfying for an audience who's expecting Jon Snow to marry Daenerys and live happily ever after. Anyhow, that's a screenwriter's take on Game of Thrones. I hope you liked it, and I hope this video wasn't too long. Tune in next time for who knows what. My name is Tony D. I am on Patreon. I do the comics on the Web Comic Factory and Super Frat. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.